Conseguem ouvir bem? Okay. Bom dia. Estou aqui já uma excelente contextualização sobre a situação económica. Este primeiro painel debruça sobre se precisamos ou não de um modelo económico alternativo. Acho que vou ser muito breve, porque já estamos um pouco em cima da hora, mas o nosso objetivo como seres humanos é sermos felizes, basicamente. E nós procuramos esta felicidade de diferentes formas. Existem necessidades mais imediatas, como ter comida, dormir, etc. Existem necessidades um pouco mais expandidas que nós queremos fazer. Passar tempo com a nossa família, passar tempo com a natureza, sei lá, criar, fazer alguma coisa com artes, procurar algo acerca da nossa existência neste universo. E o que acaba por acontecer é que a maior parte do tempo nós já passamos 1/3 da nossa vida a dormir e acabamos a ser condicionados pelo sistema económico em que nós estamos a passar a maior parte do resto do tempo a lutar para sobreviver. E a felicidade, nós temos a nossa procura de felicidade a nível individual, mas existe também uma felicidade coletiva da sociedade. E nós temos que nos questionar se aquilo que nós queremos é, de facto, estar a viver para trabalhar, a viver para pagar as contas, ou se nós queremos usar a tecnologia e todos os meios que temos à nossa disposição para criar uma realidade na qual nós trabalhamos para viver, ganhamos a nossa comida, a nossa existência nesta sociedade, não é? Que tem custos, trabalhando, e que isso é feito de forma a termos tempo para as nossas outras procuras. Porque se nós analisarmos para trás, não está a existir esta tendência. Todos nós ou temos filhos ou temos amigos que têm filhos. Portanto, pelo rumo que a economia está a levar, parece claramente um rumo não sustentável. Há uns anos atrás, se recuarmos para antes da crise, se recuarmos aí para 2008, 2007, havia mais a perspectiva em Portugal que poderia haver um percurso ascendente na sociedade. Neste momento, as projeções são de austeridade durante mais e mais e mais anos. Portanto, este rumo que a sociedade está a levar é altamente questionável do ponto de vista humano e até do ponto de vista do ecossistema. Ou seja, nós temos toda a sociedade, toda a natureza que está a ser posta em causa pela nossa existência e que se calhar não é necessário ser feito. Isto é uma reflexão que nós temos que ter. Portanto, eu vou passar aqui aos três. As três pessoas vão fazer a apresentação. O primeiro vai ser o Sr. Mark Friedman, aqui no meio. Mark Friedman ensina Economia na South Central College, em Minnesota, nos Estados Unidos. É doutorado em Economia pela Universidade Estadual do Colorado. Coordenou projetos de investigação sobre a crescente desigualdade de salários e democracia económica e antes da sua carreira académica foi membro de 2 cooperativas de trabalhadores. O título da apresentação é Desigualdades e Desastre Económico, Novas Evidências.
É o canal 1, sim, mas não estava a dar lá fora. It was working outside, I just checked it.
Aqui não.
Mas aqui não estava nada.
Canal 2, não é?
Can you please fix it? Get a translator? What channel should it be on?
Channel 1.
Not hearing anything yet.
Não, não sei nada.
Ok, então para dar a oportunidade à tradução para fazer mais uma experiência, vou-vos relatar o que é que eu vi quando vinhamos entrar no edifício. Eu vinha com a Manuela a andar ali pelo passeio e ao nosso lado vinha um senhor a olhar para o chão. E o passeio dava para 3 pessoas, mas havia uma planta que estava no meio do caminho. E o senhor ia olhar para o chão e bateu com a cabeça na planta e depois olhou para cima a ver o que é que se passava. E acho que nós, se calhar, como sociedade, devíamos fazer o mesmo. Olhar para cima a ver o que é que se passa. Caso contrário, podemos ir a bater em qualquer coisa que não era o nosso plano. Serviu para resolver a tradução?
Não. Mais outra história?
Outra história.
a joke. Do you hear me something? Can you hear? Yes. Okay, good. Can you, those of you who have the translator, can you hear now? Yes. Okay.
Eu vou só dar.
Okay. All right, ready to go.
Hello, thank you for coming. After that nice introduction by my two sisters here, they covered everything pretty well, but maybe I can add a couple things. So I'll be speaking on the connection between inequality and instability. Is there a connection? Does one cause the other? Let's take a look. A lot of economists are looking at the question now, because the world is suffering still from the economic disasters that occurred in 2007 and 2008. But there's an economist by the name of Emmanuel Says from... Perfect, thank you. Great. Okay. He's from Berkeley and the University of Paris. He came up with this diagram that has been very much reproduced. This is from the United States. I apologize, a lot of the examples I'll be using are from the United States, which I'm most familiar with. But anyway, we see in this point era of time, we have relatively low inequality. So this is the top income share of the top 1% of income earners in the United States. So here we have the immediate post-war period that a lot of observers see as kind of a golden era where the United States had relatively shared prosperity. Incomes were growing, but everybody's income was growing. And that was accompanied with a relatively low share going to the upper 1%. In the 1970s, that started to change. We had a steady increase among the 1% until we reached a peak right in 2007. Well, when was the last time we had a peak like that? Well, in 1929, and everybody knows what happened in 1929. That was, of course, the beginning of the Great Depression. So, the connection seems almost unavoidable, but we need more than that. We need a little bit more evidence. In fact, other economists that are looking at the question, if they look at all recessions, they had a hard time finding a really steady pattern as emerged in American history. There's a proudest economist, Ravi Batra, who has taken this back even further before this came out, and showed a similar pattern throughout very large depressions, at least for the United States. What is the contribution of Proud theory to the question? Well, according to Proud theory, there are two primary causes of depressions. First of all, Proud will distinguish between what we might call an ordinary recession, or in Proudist terms, what would be a normal pause, and a very severe contraction, an economic disaster that we can call a depression. So, first of all, concentration of wealth is the primary cause according to crowd theory, and that is generally accompanied by various forms of exploitation that contributes to the contraction and suffering of the people. A related factor is a blockage in the circulation of money. In Proudhist terms, Proudhist literature uses the term rolling of money, becomes stopped for various reasons. And that is what spreads the crisis. In the United States, there's the expression, well, how did the disaster spread from Wall Street to Main Street? Main Street is a common name for a street in main commercial districts in small towns in the U.S. So when circulation money becomes blocked, that's when a financial disaster spreads through the rest of the economy. We need to try to establish some kind of mechanism. Well, how does it happen? How does simply the concentration of income and wealth cause an economic disaster? Well, we have and that is a lot of other countries also. From that golden era that I talked about before, Americans have been accustomed to continually rising standards of living. People want to maintain their levels of consumption. Well, they've been kind of encouraged to do that by borrowing in the United States. If incomes are not growing, it's been observed, well, one way that households in the United States have been able to maintain the consumption is by adding more family members to the workforce. Spouses have been joining the workforce in the 70s and 80s and so forth. Unless we start subscribing to polygamy, that's going to be somewhat limited for most households. So the next strategy that was used by households was to borrow more. And with the increasing concentration of wealth, wealthy are looking for something to do with their surplus money. It works out very well, right? For the wealthy, not only are they concentration of their income, but then ensnaring the rest of the population in debt. Another factor is greater risk preference on the part of the wealthy. Most people of average incomes are going to be relatively careful with their savings. Their retirement depends on their savings being present. Very wealthy don't think that their future consumption is going to be dependent on their extra savings, and so they're going to be looking for maximum profit from their investments. Will be very much more willing to take on riskier investments. My own research tends to confirm that it's in preliminary stages. What I've done is looked at all the recessions from about the last 100 years in over 100 countries. The difference between what I did and what others did is I looked at all the recessions and looked at what causes the most severe ones. What are the factors that tend towards severity. Again, looking at the distinction between an ordinary pause and a very severe contraction. So I compared income inequality by different measures. There's one common measure is so-called Gini ratio. So I compared that with various measures of contraction, looking at different thresholds, say contractions of gross domestic product of over 10%, or drops in consumption of over 10%, or over 15%, and so forth. And by various measures of inequality and economic disasters, you see a very strong correlation. This is just one statistical test that I'm showing you here. So these are, oh, I'm sorry. No, whatever. Okay. Here are different things that are normally considered to be associated with severe contractions, like a currency crisis, debt crisis, stock market crash, bank crisis, inflation. On the last column here, you see probability of that being linked to here my dependent variable is percent GDP fall. In other words, the greater drop of gross domestic product in percentage terms, the more closely the association is here. Generally, what this means here, 000 for top share, that's the share of income going to the top 1%. Okay, as this gets bigger, you're going to get a larger drop in GDP. So that correlation, this 000, what that means, I'm sorry to get technical on you, but that is connected to what's known as statistical significance. So that means there's almost no probability that they're unconnected. Or putting it in another way, it's an almost 100% probability that there is a causal link. On the other hand, things that we normally associate with these kinds of crises, like a currency crisis, stock market crash, debt crisis, and so forth, they're very weakly linked. Matter of fact, these would not be considered statistically significant at all. The closest we have is inflation crisis. That would be considered statistically significant. So if we have a hyperinflation, yes, that can be associated with a severe downturn. Okay, so again, what's some of the evidence of greater concentration and exploitation? Well, this is evidence of exploitation for the United States. Again, in this golden era, we saw rising incomes. This blue line is family incomes, median family incomes. And as economists would expect, that's rising with productivity. The average value of the average person's work per hour. You would expect, as people are being more productive, they should be having rising living standards. They should be having higher incomes. And that's exactly what happened in that golden era of the post-war period. But then there started to be a separation. Productivity is still going up, whereas median incomes have been stagnating. Of course, as a result of recession, family incomes are falling. Okay. So this is another graph of incomes. We see the top 1%. Top 1% has been growing very steadily. Even other people that we would consider to be relatively wealthy, the top 5%, the top 10%, and the top 20%, they're continually rising since the 1970s. but not nearly as rapidly as the top 1%. The rest of us are all down here. So other evidence of, yes, evidence of exploitation. How did it manifest in the United States, at least? I think there are similar things in Europe before the crisis. Poor neighborhoods, neighborhoods where people could not get home loans if their life depended on it beforehand, were now specifically targeted for lending. It was discovered that if the financial industry really wants to expand, there are limitations. They have to find a new market. That new market was poor neighborhoods. It was fraudulent loans were very common. So-called ninja loans. Ninja stands for no income, no job. There was no verification required for mortgages of over $500,000. They were low interest loans, so the finance companies did not expect to make money on interest. But frequent refinancing was assumed that they would refinance them frequently with a lot of fees involved. Fraudulent foreclosures. When the market started to collapse, even homes that were current on their payments were foreclosed on. And it's very difficult to fight the bank. Okay. Well, I'm running out of time, so let me try to run ahead here a little bit. So again, all of this was encouraged by the biggest banks, and government was guaranteeing these very poor quality loans. And no criminal convictions yet, of course. Other evidence of concentration of wealth. This is a percent of profits that go to the financial sector. And with a relatively short period of time, we see it doubling or tripling until 40% of all profits are in the financial sector in the United States. As Patricia was saying, that's not a productive sector. They don't produce anything. But nonetheless, that's where profits are being produced, and that's where a lot of that concentration is occurring. Okay. Again, after the crisis, there was a decline in those profits, but you can see they've recovered very nicely, whereas the rest of the economy has not. Our biggest banks that were responsible for the fallout that were bailed out, we see that, again, within a very short period of time, they've been growing bigger and bigger. And the problem was that they're so-called too big to fail. Well, after the crisis, we see that they've gotten even bigger, not smaller. So that is harmful. I don't have time, I think, to go through the harms from financialization in detail. But again, we have a concentration of wealth at the expense of the rest of the economy. Other factor of preventing money from rolling, money not circulating through the economy. Again, immediately following the crisis, this is bank reserves in the United States. Banks are required to keep a certain portion of their money on hand, so to make sure that depositors who want their money can get their money back, right? Banks are going to want to keep that to a minimum. Throughout most of our history, the amount of the banks held in reserve was very small. Again, they wanted to make money on their money. immediately following the crisis, with the collapse of one financial house known as Lehman Brothers, well, we can see what suddenly happened to bank reserves. Banks suddenly found it not in their interest to be doing what banks are supposed to do, mainly supporting the economy, providing loans, providing what would be routine financing, lending of all forms throughout the economy suddenly collapsed, and we can see that's reflected in the reserves in the banking system. So again, that's how the crisis spread from Wall Street to Main Street. Okay. Well, let me kind of end up through here. I think we know that there's a lot of harms that come from unemployment that, as a result of these kinds of things. What this shows is that there's long-term harm. Oops, sorry. Long-term harm. Not only is this red line shows our current GDP, the blue line shows potential GDP. As a result of the crisis, our potential for the future has gone down too. Workers that are unemployed for a long period of time, they lose their skills. Investment has not happened. That would have happened otherwise. So we don't have machinery, roads, bridges, and so forth. Okay, let me just finish up here. What alternatives do we have? Economic democracy is inherently more stable. So let me at least make that point, that where cooperatives are not going to be firing people. If there is a downturn, well, they're going to be forced to reduce their incomes. That's going to be a better alternative than laying people off. Co-ops are more oriented towards the local economy also. They're more resistant to international contagions. Machinery is going to bring more leisure, not unemployment in a cooperative. And finally, under economic democracy as proposed, there will be a government policy of 100% employment. So let me end with that.
Mike, thank you. So, sorry for keeping the timing. We have a long program with a lot of interesting presentations. There will be some minutes in the end of the 3 presentations for questions. So if you have specific questions, you can note down and then we can know. So now we'll go to next presentation by Peter De Vos. Peter De Vos é um cineasta belga, sediado na Antuérpia. Desenvolve projetos documentais com forte compromisso social e um grande interesse na possibilidade dos novos mídia. Começou a fazer filmes como ativista de vídeos, ao fazer relatórios para o Centro de Mídia Alternativo Indimedia.be, mas rapidamente adotou uma abordagem mais narrativa. Em 2012, cofundou a DocWorkers, uma plataforma de produção ativa a nível criativo e social, com uma paixão para vídeo e documentários online. A DocWorkers desenvolve filmes para campanhas de movimentos sociais, assim como projetos de documentários independentes. O título da apresentação vai ser Ação Local numa Visão Global e o Papel dos Consumidores. Please.
Okay. I have a small video that I wanted to show before we start. It's in the same folder as my presentation. Okay. So, it's not supposed to look like this. Well, okay. This is a world map, and this is a visualization of protests in the world since 1997. So, what we're seeing here, that in the beginning there weren't a lot of protests, and now, well, time is advancing, we see that there's a lot of things happening in the world. This is something that I find very beautiful to see. It's like a 1-minute history lesson of uprisings in the world. It shows two things. See, this is becoming ridiculous. Well, okay, we can stop this now. So, why am I showing this? It's what I like. Okay, what I like about this thing is that often we become like a bit negative about, especially now today in Europe we are in a, because of the crisis, we're in a defensive modus. We are trying to hold on to all the social advances that were conquered by previous generations. And I think we should try to change that mindset a little bit. So, this is a film I made within our collective. It's called Bye Bye Europe, and it's, we're going to be seeing it later today. And in this film we bring a little bit of analysis, what may have been the causes of the Euro crisis, different than we hear normally in the media. So we talk about how the financial crisis cost billions and nothing really has happened since that day, even if politicians came and say, okay, we're going to really clean this up. We show how austerity is killing all the social advances. We see that income inequality is huge in Europe, and we talk also about the role of Germany in the European Union. The film is going to be shown later today, but the main question in the documentary is, what kind of Europe do we really want? Is it a Europe based on competition or a Europe based on collaboration, where people and nature comes before profit? So for this film, we did a lot of interviews all over Europe. We were at making friends at the German Stock Exchange, and we were also making friends in Barcelona with Indignados. And one thing that I saw during my research is that there's actually a lot of things going on in Europe about movements of civil disobedience, of people saying enough. So this picture is a photo of a protest in Spain against evictions. As you might know, there is in Spain over 400,000 families have been evicted from their houses. A very important movement has started that is saying, even it's illegal, we're going to block these evictions. For me, that was a very new thing to learn, and apparently this is a mass movement in Spain. So this is something important here. It's like people knowingly breaking the law because they say the law is not just. Yeah? And like this story, I saw many stories all over Europe. The problem is that we don't really know about these stories. Another guy that I met in my research is Isaac Rosa. Isaac Rosa is a Spanish writer. In the end, we couldn't get him in the film because of organizational reasons, but he wrote this opinion piece in a Spanish newspaper that I really liked. And it says, everything is possible, but don't fool yourselves. So, what he says is that 10 years ago, if you would have said, you know, like, the crisis is imminent, everybody would have said, come on man, you're crazy, you're a lunatic. But today, if we would paint like a catastrophic scenario about Europe, you know, like Europe falling apart, going back to fascism, maybe like the start of World War III. Okay, it's maybe far-fetched, but we're not going to put our hand in Dutch we say put our hand in the fire. That is not going to happen, you know. So what he says is that even though we are all over Europe on the streets and we have many good ideas about what we should do We know that we should make the financial sector public, or at least under public control. We know that we should redistribute wealth. We know many things like that. But if we make a bet whether a catastrophic scenario or all our good ideas that we have would really be possible, which one would you bet that would happen? Well, we sort of believe more that the catastrophic scenario would happen. So, what Isaac Rossa is saying is that our problem is that we, even ourselves, that are protesting, that are thinking about society and how we should change it, we don't seem to get our head out of the box. And the box is accepting capitalism as a reality and understanding that capitalism is the problem, and if you want to change something, you have to realize that capitalism is a problem. And it's something that we should think about. Then you can have large discussions about whether you should like adapt the system or change the system. It's not about that. It's about realizing that that is the problem. And he said that the problem is that, from a Spanish point of view, that even though we have all these good ideas, we cannot get out of the capitalist reality, because all our good ideas don't fit in capitalist reality. So, this is a picture of the Financial Times. There's an interesting thing about the Financial Times because it writes for business. It's differently than our other media. It's not about. It's more objective because they really know what they want. They want a clean, stable environment to make money. And there was once an opinion piece about the social movements in Europe, and they said like, well, don't worry too much about it, because today it's still more activism as a lifestyle rather than activism as a real political movement. So they were actually saying like, well, you should be more scared about the far right, but the left, you know, like the social protests. Of course, it's Financial Times, but I'm just bringing it in as an example. This is something completely else. This is some friends of mine in Venezuela. This was a good friend of mine, Gladys. I met her, I think 7 years ago when I was living in Venezuela for a year. And I went to Venezuela because I was really curious about this movement of alternative media. Because I was myself, I'm coming from alternative media in Belgium. And this was like local television stations made by people who were living in favelas, in slums. So people who were not trained for that, and they're making media and television for an audience of millions of people. And I wondered how that was possible at all. And it was possible because they changed the constitution in Venezuela after long struggles. Part of that constitution was that the radioelectric spectrum that we use to transmit television and radio signals, that they cannot be private. They're a public thing. So if they're a public thing, everybody should be able to broadcast. So that was an idea that for me, my head exploded. So, I'm going back. So, as you probably heard, this Chavez guy, who was partly responsible for all these things, he died some time ago, and immediately Gladys sent me an SMS saying like, even before I read it somewhere in the media, Chavez died, but don't worry, they're not going to fuck us like they're fucking you in Europe. So I'm telling this story because in Latin America, they managed to go from a defensive movement to an offensive movement. They're not like defending rights, they're English for... No, they're conquering rights, or there's a better word, but you understand what I mean. So, Latin America in the 1980s. Latin America had this history of right-wing dictatorships, and especially in the 1980s they had this huge debt crisis, and many countries were living through structural adjustment programs, which is a fancy word for austerity, what we are seeing today. So they lived through what Europe is starting to live today, some time ago. Of course, you cannot make exact comparisons, but the idea was that people were suffering a lot in Latin America, but people were resisting as well, like we are resisting in Europe as well. And they were resisting in many different ways, like we are doing here. There are like single issue movements about women's rights, single issues land redistribution, there are intellectuals doing more studies and stuff, very many different things. And the change that happened there was that from all these different movements, they made a political movement. I bring here the example of the coca farmers in Bolivia, who at first were protesting, and sometimes even violently and whatever. And then they noticed, like, whatever we do, we can't access power. Power is there, power is not listening to us. So if we want to change politics, we need to change the politicians. So they said, we need to have somebody from us up there. So what happened, told very short, Evo Morales was a coca farmer and then a trade union worker, became president. And there they changed the constitution and started a long process of trying to make society more equal and more just. You can make a lot of criticism about Latin America today, but you cannot deny the fact that in Latin America the inequality numbers have gone into the right direction, but in an incredibly fast pace. And also in Latin America, okay, I'll get back to what I was saying. What happened is that from all these small political movements, they managed to become, small social movements, they managed to make political movements. And in a few years' time, they changed Latin America from a continent that was under the hegemony of the right to a continent that was under the hegemony of the left. This is an older map, so a lot of these people have already changed, but it gives you a general overview. Red is left or center-left governments. So I was talking about, I'm not advocating for a single one of those presidents. I don't think we should copy the model of Venezuela, I don't think we should copy the model of Colombia, but I think there's many things that we can learn from there. Can I just show the last slide, please? Ah. No, next. Oh no, this is mine. Ah, okay. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is that if there is one place today where there is happening like mass experiments, mass social experiments on how to organize future society, it is Latin America. I'm showing you a picture of a communal council in Venezuela. And this is something that was imposed and that is put in the constitution. So it's a new level of political decision making. That's at the community level. So neighborhoods can come together and take decisions on how they want to organize things, and also they have the right to debate and give comments about laws being passed in parliamentary level. And in the beginning everybody was saying like, okay, interesting, you know, like having these chat groups and whatever, but they're actually giving budget to allocate. I think it was, I'm inventing the number, I don't know whether it's 10 or 20%, but a huge part of the national spending budget is allocated to the communal councils. Just one example of what for us seems radical democracy, but there is becoming commonplace. So, my point is that what is my point? I think the point is that it's fantastic what everybody is doing, and I think we should be optimistic. A lot of times when we talk to each other, we are saying like, okay, but we're doing this thing, but the rest of the population is not following us. Or there's people in the union in Belgium who say like, they're working there and they say like, okay, so we have all this analysis, but the other workers don't understand what we're saying, and people get tired and get sad about if change is going to be possible at all ever, at some way. And I think Latin America shows that first we need to have patience and continue and be happy with every small victory that we have on the local level, and most importantly, that all these local initiatives start to get political dimension. Because as somebody in my documentary says, all the challenges that we have now as a global community, whether it's climate change, whether it's the power of the financial sector, those are all global problems. And global problems will need to be addressed on a global decision-making level. Problem is that today we have no access to those decision-making places. So that is why we need to reinforce our political power to make change at that level. That's my story.
Vamos ter aqui 5 minutos de Energizer. Vamos descobrir o que é isto.
Olá, dá para ouvir todos? Sim, dá para ouvir? Olá. É para tirar o...
Tira os headsets. Take off your headsets.
There's going to be translation.
I will translate what you will say.
Então, como está a energia?
How is the energy? Is it good?
Onde está na...
Or are you?
Ok, vamos para o pé.
Let's stand up.